The courtroom fell into complete silence when Karen Thompson, a 320-pound real estate investor who believed her expensive lawyer had secured her victory, looked directly at Judge Judy Sheindlin and said the words that would destroy her entire life in the next 3 minutes. "Listen, Grandma, you're overrated and everyone knows it. I've seen your show. You're just a bitter old woman who peaked 20 years ago. Maybe you should retire and let someone who actually understands modern business take over." The silence that followed was so deep that even the camera operators froze, their equipment suddenly feeling heavier as they captured what would become one of the most devastating courtroom moments in television history. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the kind of death stare that had made seasoned attorneys rethink their entire careers. What happened next would turn Karen Thompson from an arrogant bully into the most humiliated woman in America, her face plastered across 340 million screens as the ultimate example of what happens when unstoppable arrogance meets immovable judicial authority. Before we show you the exact moment when this entitled Karen insulted America's most feared judge to her face and got utterly demolished in 47 seconds of pure legal destruction, make sure you hit that like button if you believe disrespectful people deserve real consequences. Subscribe so you never miss these explosive courtroom moments where bullies finally meet someone who won't tolerate their behavior. What you're about to witness will restore your faith in justice and prove that karma is not only real, it has perfect timing. What makes this story truly remarkable isn't just that Karen lost her case or got embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in those 3 minutes was so brutally righteous that it ended Karen's entire real estate career, triggered a federal investigation, and made her the poster child for why you should never disrespect someone with 52 years of legal experience just because they're older than you. Karen had walked into that courtroom with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of using her imposing physical presence to intimidate anyone who couldn't fight back. At 52 years old, she had perfected the art of bulldozing her way through life, using her size and booming voice as weapons against retail workers, customer service representatives, and anyone who dared to challenge her. She drove a black Mercedes SUV with vanity plates that read "Closer," wore expensive designer pantsuits like armor, and carried herself with the energy of someone who had never faced real consequences for her bullying behavior. In her mind, Judge Judy was just another obstacle to overcome, another authority figure she could dominate with volume and intimidation tactics that had always worked in her predatory real estate business. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have understood as she strutted into that courtroom like a conquering general, was that Judge Judy had already spotted 23 lies in her initial paperwork before Karen even opened her mouth. She had no idea that Judge Judy's research team had uncovered a criminal background that would make her blood run cold. She had no idea that calling Judge Judy an overrated grandma was about to trigger the most thorough public dismantling of her character, her business, and her reputation that daytime television had ever seen. The case seemed simple enough on the surface, just another small claims dispute over a real estate transaction gone wrong. Karen was suing Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old first-time homebuyer, for $8,500, claiming breach of contract and emotional distress after Lisa backed out of purchasing a property from Karen's investment portfolio. This was never really about a simple property dispute. It was about power, control, and what happens when a convicted felon with a pattern of targeting vulnerable young buyers finally meets a judge who has spent her entire career dismantling predators exactly like her. Lisa Chen sat trembling in the plaintiff's chair, clutching a folder filled with inspection reports, legal documents, and evidence of the nightmare Karen had put her through for the past 6 months. She was a young graphic designer who had saved every penny for 5 years to afford a down payment on her first home, only to discover that the property Karen was selling had undisclosed foundation cracks, dangerous mold growth, and electrical violations that could have burned the house down within months. When Lisa tried to back out legally after the inspection revealed these horrors, Karen unleashed a campaign of harassment and intimidation that cost Lisa over $3,000 in legal fees just to defend herself against baseless threats. Karen showed up at her workplace, sent threatening text messages at all hours, and promised to destroy Lisa's credit and future if she didn't complete the purchase of a house that was literally falling apart. The $8,500 Karen demanded would have completely wiped out Lisa's down payment savings, destroying her dream of home ownership and proving, in Karen's mind, that bullies always win when They're big enough and loud enough to scare their victims into submission. What neither woman knew was that this case would become a cultural phenomenon, a moment so perfectly captured that it would be studied in law schools, shared across every social media platform, and remembered for years as the definitive example of justice delivered with surgical precision. Karen Thompson's reputation in the real estate community was one of barely concealed predatory behavior, wrapped in expensive suits and aggressive handshakes. For the past 8 years since her release from federal prison in 2017, she had rebuilt her life and business in a new state where nobody knew about her conviction for real estate fraud. She changed her business name from Hutchkins Properties to Thompson Realty Group, carefully scrubbed her online presence of any trace of her past, and rebranded herself as a successful investor who helped first-time buyers achieve their dreams of home ownership. But the truth behind that image was far darker. Karen had a type, and she pursued her victims with the precision of a predator who had studied their weaknesses and knew exactly how to exploit them. Her targets were almost always young women, particularly women of color, who were buying their first homes and lacked the experience to spot fraudulent practices. She sought out buyers who were emotional about their purchase, who had stretched their budgets to the limit, and who would be too intimidated by legal threats to fight back when things went wrong. Karen kept detailed files on every potential client, tracking their finances, family backgrounds, emotional states, and most importantly, their likelihood of mounting a defense if she decided to pressure them into a bad deal. She had learned from her previous conviction that the key to avoiding prosecution was to choose victims who couldn't afford to fight, who would cave under pressure rather than risk everything in a prolonged legal battle. Over the past 8 years, Karen had closed 47 transactions, and at least 23 of them involved properties with serious undisclosed defects she had intentionally concealed. Foundation cracks covered with fresh paint, mold growth hidden behind new drywall, electrical systems that barely passed inspection because she knew exactly which inspector to call. Plumbing problems timed to appear months after closing, when buyers had no legal recourse. She had perfected the art of the hard close, using her imposing physical presence to dominate meetings, her booming voice to silence questions, and her aggressive body language to make her buyers feel small, uncertain, and powerless. When buyers tried to back out after discovering problems, Karen unleashed her full arsenal of intimidation tactics, threatening phone calls, surprise visits to their workplaces, and letters from her attorney packed with dense legal jargon designed to terrify anyone unfamiliar with litigation. Over the years, the State Real Estate Board had received 8 formal complaints about her business practices, but her expensive attorneys managed to have every single one dismissed or quietly settled before any formal sanctions could be imposed. Karen knew exactly how to work the system, how to drag out investigations until complainants gave up, how to offer just enough concessions to avoid serious consequences, and how to keep her record technically clean while never admitting any wrongdoing. In her mind, she wasn't doing anything illegal. She was just being a tough businesswoman in a competitive market where, as she liked to say, only the strong survive. She believed that if young buyers were naive enough to sign contracts without proper due diligence, then they deserved the expensive lessons that followed. Lisa Chen had been Karen's latest target, selected with the same cold calculation that guided all of Karen's schemes. Lisa was 28, a freelance graphic designer who had saved $35,000 for a down payment by living with roommates and working 60-hour weeks for 5 years. A first-generation Asian American, Lisa saw buying her first home as the ultimate reward for her family's sacrifices, the embodiment of the American dream. Karen had first spotted Lisa at an open house 6 months earlier and immediately recognized her as the perfect mark. She was young, inexperienced, emotionally invested in the idea of homeownership and clearly stretching her finances to the limit. At first, Karen played the role of a friendly mentor, someone who understood how hard it was to get started and wanted to help Lisa find her dream home. The property Karen showed her was a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, listed at $285,000, seemingly ideal for a first-time buyer. What Lisa didn't know was that Karen had purchased the house 6 months earlier at a foreclosure auction for $180,000, fully aware of the severe structural issues the previous owners couldn't afford to repair. Karen spent about $15,000 on cosmetic updates, fresh paint, new carpet, and light fixtures, carefully hiding the foundation cracks and water damage that would have scared off any informed buyer. She then pressured Lisa to act fast, insisting there were multiple offers and that she'd lose her dream home if she didn't move immediately. Terrified of missing her chance and trusting Karen's apparent professionalism, Lisa signed the purchase agreement and paid a $3,000 earnest money deposit within 48 hours. Everything seemed perfect, until she scheduled a pre-closing inspection 3 weeks before the deal was set to finalize. Lisa hired a home inspector recommended by a friend, and what he found made her stomach drop. The foundation had multiple stress cracks running along the eastern wall of the basement, some wide enough to fit a credit card through, signs of serious structural settlement that would cost at least $45,000 to repair properly. Behind the fresh drywall in the basement, the inspector discovered extensive black mold growth that had been covered up rather than remediated, a serious health hazard that would cost another $20,000 to address properly. The electrical panel was outdated and dangerously overloaded, with several circuits showing signs of heat damage that posed a genuine fire risk. The plumbing had been patched with temporary fixes that were already failing, and the roof, though it appeared fine from the ground, had significant damage to the underlayment that would require full replacement within 2 years at a cost of $18,000. Lisa felt sick as she read through the 47-page inspection report detailing defect after defect that Karen had never disclosed. Despite being legally obligated to reveal all known material issues, the total repair costs exceeded $95,000, making the house worth less than half of Karen's asking price. Lisa immediately called Karen, expecting understanding or at least a renegotiation. Instead, she met a completely different person from the friendly mentor who had guided her early on. Karen's voice was cold and sharp. She dismissed the inspection report as exaggerated nonsense from an incompetent inspector and insisted Lisa was contractually bound to complete the purchase no matter what some paranoid contractor thinks. When Lisa tried to explain that she couldn't possibly afford a home needing nearly $100,000 in repairs, Karen's response was ruthless. She reminded Lisa that her earnest money deposit was non-refundable, warned that backing out would result in a lawsuit for damages, and claimed she had already turned down other offers based on Lisa's commitment. The threats began almost immediately. Within days, Karen's attorney sent a formal letter demanding that Lisa either complete the purchase or face a lawsuit for breach of contract, specific performance, and damages totaling $35,000. The letter was dense with intimidating legal language, phrases like fiduciary, responsibility, contractual obligation, and failure to perform under binding agreement. For Lisa, who had never been involved in any legal dispute and was already financially stretched, the letter felt like a death sentence, and Karen didn't stop there. Over the next few months, she escalated her harassment, showing up unannounced at the small design studio where Lisa worked, confronting her in front of clients and coworkers, and sending text messages at all hours. Some were threatening, promising to ruin Lisa's credit and make an example of her, while others were condescending, telling her to stop panicking and trust the process. Karen even posted cryptic social media updates about deadbeat buyers who wasted her time and cost her money, posts that Lisa's friends immediately recognized as being directed at her. The relentless stress took a visible toll. Lisa lost 15 pounds, developed anxiety-induced insomnia, and spent $3,000 on legal consultations just to understand her rights. Her dream of owning a home had turned into a waking nightmare, one that consumed every thought and every dollar she had left. And now Karen's $8,500 lawsuit threatened to wipe out nearly a quarter of Lisa's entire life savings. Meanwhile, Karen had been preparing for her appearance on Judge Judy with the confidence of someone who had never truly been held accountable for her predatory behavior. She spent 4 weeks working with her attorney to build what she believed was an airtight case, printing out articles from real estate websites about buyer obligations and contractual duties. She practiced her testimony in front of her bathroom mirror, perfecting the authoritative tone and aggressive body language that had served her so well in intimidating clients and competitors. She selected her courtroom outfit with the precision of a general choosing armor for battle. An expensive black pantsuit, bold statement jewelry, and designer shoes that added 2 inches to her already imposing height. She told her friends and colleagues that she was going to school this television judge on real estate law, that she would expose Lisa as just another flaky millennial trying to avoid her responsibilities, and that her appearance on national television would probably generate excellent publicity for her business. Karen even posted on her business Facebook page about her upcoming appearance, writing that she was excited to represent professional real estate investors everywhere and show America what happens when buyers try to back out of legitimate contracts just because they get cold feet. Her confidence was unshakable, built on years of getting away with predatory behavior and facing minimal consequences. What she failed to understand was that Judge Judy Schindlin was not a small-time inspector she could bully, not a legal aid attorney she could outlast, and definitely not another victim she could intimidate into submission with her size and her voice. The Judge Judy courtroom buzzed with its usual electric energy as cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats, expecting another routine small claims dispute to unfold before their eyes. Production assistants made their final checks while the bailiff took his position near Judge Judy's bench, and the court stenographer prepared to capture every word of what would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history. Nobody in that room, not the crew who had worked on the show for years, not the audience members who had watched Judge Judy demolish thousands of cases, and certainly not Karen Thompson herself, had any idea they were about to witness a destruction so complete and so devastating that it would be studied and shared for generations as the definitive example of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. Karen made her entrance into the courtroom like a heavyweight boxer stepping into the ring, her footsteps heavy and deliberate, her chin lifted in defiance, her expensive leather briefcase clutched like a weapon she was eager to use. She had dressed to intimidate in a black designer pantsuit that likely cost more than Lisa's monthly rent, bold gold jewelry that caught the studio lights and broadcast her supposed success, and perfectly styled hair that had taken 2 hours at the salon that morning. She shot confident glances at the cameras, already imagining herself going viral for all the right reasons, already composing the social media posts she'd make about her victory over the ungrateful young buyer who had wasted her valuable time. Taking her place at the defendant's table, she sat with the posture of someone who believed she had already won, arms crossed over her chest and eyes full of disdain as she glanced toward Lisa Chen, who sat trembling at the plaintiff's table clutching her folder of inspection reports and legal documents. Judge Judy entered the courtroom with her characteristic no-nonsense efficiency, taking her seat behind the bench with the calm authority of someone who had presided over more than 20,000 cases and could spot a liar within seconds. She glanced down at her notes, then up at Karen with an expression that seasoned viewers would instantly recognize, the look that meant someone was already in serious trouble, even if they didn't know it yet. Judge Judy opened the case with her trademark precision, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel designed to separate truth from deception. "Miss Chen," she began, "you're suing Mrs. Thompson for $8,500, claiming harassment and demanding the return of your earnest money deposit after discovering serious defects in a property she was selling you. Tell me what happened. You said—" Lisa's testimony was emotional but steady. She described her excitement about buying her first home, the devastating discovery of extensive undisclosed defects during the inspection, and Karen's campaign of harassment and intimidation when she tried to back out legally. She detailed the threatening phone calls, unannounced visits to her workplace, the $3,000 she had spent on legal consultations just to understand her rights, and the relentless stress that had stolen her sleep and peace of mind for 6 long months. Judge Judy listened with focused attention, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific dates, conversations, and threats Karen had made. Then she turned her gaze to Karen, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees under the weight of her piercing stare. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Judy began, her voice calm but firm, "did you disclose the foundation issues, the mold, and the electrical problems to Miss Chen before she signed the purchase agreement?" The question was simple and direct, demanding a clear yes or no. But Karen, blinded by years of getting away with predatory behavior, couldn't resist the urge to lecture, explain, and justify. "Your Honor," she began, her voice taking on the condescending tone that had made countless viewers want to throw things at their screens. "The real estate business is complex and buyers have a responsibility to do their own due diligence. I'm not required to hold everyone's hand through the process. If Miss Chen hired an inspector who found issues, that's what inspections are for." She knew the rules when she signed the contract. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly. The first warning sign experienced. Viewers recognized as trouble brewing like a storm on the horizon. Mrs. Thompson, she interrupted, her tone still professional but sharp enough to cut through steel. I didn't ask about the complexity of real estate or Miss Chen's responsibilities. I asked a very simple question. Did you disclose the defects or didn't you? Karen's face flushed with irritation at being interrupted, at being challenged by someone she clearly considered just another obstacle to overcome. She let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind reserved for dealing with incompetent service workers who couldn't follow simple instructions, and said with barely concealed contempt, Well, if you'll let me finish explaining the context, Your Honor, you might understand how these things actually work in the real world of real estate transactions. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to stop breathing. In 25 years of presiding over her television courtroom, Judge Judy had been challenged, argued with, and disrespected in countless ways. But there was something in Karen's tone. The dismissive way she said, If you'll let me finish. That crossed a line nobody should ever cross. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to that deadly calm tone that signaled someone was about to be professionally destroyed. Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson, she said. Did you just tell me that I need to let you finish? Did you just suggest that I don't understand how things work in the real world? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would be talked about, shared, and replayed for years to come. But Karen, incredibly disastrously, chose this moment to double down on her disrespect instead of showing the humility that might have saved her. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so theatrical and contemptuous that the camera captured it in perfect detail for the 340 million people who would eventually see it. She shifted her considerable weight in her chair, leaned forward with aggressive body language, and looked directly at Judge Judy with an expression of pure contempt. Then she said the words that would end her career, destroy her reputation, and transform her into the most hated woman in America overnight. Listen, Grandma, you're overrated and everyone knows it. I've seen your show. You're just a bitter old woman who peaked 20 years ago. Maybe you should retire and let someone who actually understands modern business take over. This isn't 1990 anymore. And your outdated ideas about respect and authority don't apply to successful people like me who actually know what they're doing. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, as if the entire universe had stopped rotating. Lisa Chen's mouth fell open in shock. The bailiff took an involuntary step forward. The audience seemed to collectively gasp and then hold their breath, unable to believe what they had just heard. And Judge Judy Shandlin, the woman who had spent 52 years building a reputation as one of the toughest, smartest, and most respected judicial minds in America, slowly leaned back in her chair with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. That smile, terrifying in its calmness, meant Karen Thompson had just sealed her own destruction with her arrogant words and contemptuous attitude. The smile widened just slightly, the kind of expression a chess master wears when their opponent has walked directly into a trap set from the very first move. Judge Judy leaned back with the calm patience of someone who knew the next few minutes would be remembered, shared, and studied as the definitive moment when arrogance met its perfect match in judicial authority. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice dropping to that ice-cold calm that regular viewers recognized as the precursor to total professional annihilation, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Before I rule on this case, I think the audience needs to know exactly who you are and what you've done. Because calling me an overrated grandma suggests you think my 52 years of legal experience, including 25 years as a family court judge in New York, somehow makes me less qualified to see through your lies than your Google law degree makes you qualified to commit real estate fraud, Judge Judy said, her voice icy and precise. Karen's smirk began to fade as Judge Judy opened a thick folder marked with Karen's full legal name in bold letters across the top. The confidence that had carried Karen through years of bullying victims began to crack like the foundations of the houses she had sold to unsuspecting buyers. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and began reading with the surgical precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, her voice steady and relentless. Karen Marie Thompson, formerly Karen Marie Hutchkins, convicted of federal real estate fraud in 2015, sentenced to 16 months in federal prison. The charges: involving falsifying property disclosures, selling homes with known structural defects, and defrauding 12 victims, mostly young first-time buyers who lost their life savings. Because of your deliberate deception, the courtroom erupted in audible gasps as Karen's face went from flushed red to deathly pale within seconds. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She continued reading from the folder with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had spent the previous night building an airtight case against a predator, released from federal prison in 2017, moved to a new state, changed your business name from Hutchkins Properties to Thompson Realty Group. Since then, the State Real Estate Board has received 8 formal complaints about your business practices, all involving undisclosed property defects, all targeting young women buyers. And here's what I find particularly interesting. Mrs. Thompson, 6 of those 8 complaints specifically involved women of color, whom you apparently believed would be too intimidated to fight back against your threats and your lawsuits. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice coming out as a strangled whisper, but Judge Judy raised her hand with the authority of someone who would not be interrupted by a convicted felon who had just called her an overrated grandma. The audience sat in stunned silence as Judge Judy outlined the pattern of predatory behavior Karen had engaged in for 8 years. The careful selection of vulnerable victims, the deliberate concealment of property defects, and the aggressive intimidation tactics used when buyers tried to protect themselves. You're not a businesswoman, Mrs. Thompson, Judge Judy said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. You're a predator with a real estate license. You use your physical size to intimidate people who can't fight back. You target young buyers who don't have the experience or resources to challenge you in court. You hide behind contracts and legal threats while selling them houses that are literally falling apart. And when someone like Miss Chen finally has the courage to stand up to you, you harass her, threaten her, show up at her workplace, and try to bully her into completing a fraudulent transaction. Karen's transformation was happening in real time, visible to the cameras and the millions who would watch this moment unfold. The confident bully who had strutted into the courtroom was crumbling into a shaking, sweating mess, her carefully applied makeup running as tears formed in her eyes. Your Honor, please, she stammered, her voice cracking with desperation. That's in the past. I've changed. I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just passionate about my case. Judge Judy's response was swift and merciless, delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of exposing liars and hypocrites. Changed. You called a 67-year-old federal judge an overrated grandma because I dared to question your tactics. You used your size and your voice to try to intimidate me, the same way you've intimidated dozens of vulnerable buyers. You haven't changed at all, Mrs. Thompson. You're the same criminal you were 8 years ago, just wearing a more expensive suit. The 47 seconds of unrelenting destruction continued as Judge Judy addressed the camera directly, speaking to the millions watching at home. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what entitlement looks like when it meets accountability. Mrs. Thompson walked into my courtroom thinking her physical presence and aggressive attitude would intimidate me into ruling in her favor. She thought calling me grandma would diminish my authority and make me look foolish on television. Instead, she showed America exactly what kind of person she is. A bully, a fraud, a convicted felon who learned absolutely nothing from 16 months in federal prison except how to be more careful about choosing victims who couldn't afford to fight back. The humiliation of being dissected and exposed on national television was more than Karen's ego could handle. Tears flowed freely now, carrying her makeup down her cheeks in dark streaks, transforming her into a melting portrait of her former confident self. Judge Judy delivered her ruling with finality. Judge Judy delivered judgment for the plaintiff, Lisa Chen, awarding $8,500 for the return of her earnest money deposit and reimbursement of legal fees. Additionally, Mrs. Thompson, you will pay Ms. Chen $5,000 in punitive damages for your pattern of harassment and predatory business practices, for a total judgment of $13,500. Furthermore, I am forwarding all evidence from this case, including your sworn testimony and documented lies, to the State Real Estate Board and the Federal Trade Commission for immediate investigation into whether you have violated the terms of your release and engaged in the same fraudulent behavior that sent you to prison the first time. Karen was sobbing openly now, her body shaking as the realization of her life collapsing hit her. The gavel came down with absolute finality, and Judge Judy delivered her closing words with devastating sarcasm. "You're dismissed from my courtroom, Mrs. Thompson. And may I suggest you use your retirement, which I suspect is coming very soon, to learn some respect and humility. Perhaps by the time you're 70, you'll understand that calling someone Grandma isn't an insult when that grandmother has more legal knowledge in her little finger than you'll ever have in your entire criminal career." Within 2 hours of the episode airing, the clip had exploded across every social media platform. The hashtag Overrated Grandma began trending worldwide. Ironically, every post defended Judge Judy while mocking Karen's spectacular destruction. Twitter saw 4.2 million tweets with the hashtag Karen got destroyed, as users shared the video celebrating justice delivered to an entitled bully. Facebook recorded 89 million views in the first 24 hours. TikTok users created over 2,800 reaction videos, and Reddit erupted with 45 different threads analyzing every second of the takedown. Karen Thompson had achieved fame, just not in the way she had imagined. The state real estate board suspended her license within 48 hours. The FBI opened an investigation into her business practices that would eventually result in new federal charges. 23 former clients came forward with similar complaints, creating a legal avalanche that would bury Karen for years. Her business closed within a week. Her social media accounts were deleted after being flooded with negative comments, and she was forced to file for bankruptcy within 3 months. Meanwhile, Lisa Chen received her $13,500 judgment and was finally free from the 6-month nightmare. She was featured in local news stories as the young woman who stood up to a predator, received job offers from major design firms, and eventually purchased a beautiful home from an honest seller. The case became more than a viral moment. It became required viewing in real estate ethics courses, prompted multiple states to strengthen buyer protection laws, and inspired the so-called Karen Thompson laws, imposing stricter penalties on professionals who exploit vulnerable clients. Judge Judy's stand against a bully who had called her an overrated grandma became a permanent part of her legacy. Proof that respect and integrity matter far more than size, volume, or arrogance. Respect isn't optional, and neither are the consequences of forgetting that fundamental truth.